Okay. I'm also a committee member at the Social Science and Architecture Committee, and so the way this is going to work tonight is we're going to run through a quick, some house rules, a little bit about the event and about our committee. Then I'll turn it over to Sarah, who's going to present the film, and we're going to watch the film together. It's about 20 minutes long. Sarah and I are going to have a moderated conversation, and we're going to turn it over to you to ask any questions that you might have. Also to note, and anyone who's joining us on Zoom, if you think of a question during, please just put it in the chat, and we'll try to get to those as well. So this event is organized by the Committee of Social Science and Architecture. Special thanks to the folks that helped plan, including Maura Smotrich, Evie Klein, who couldn't be here, and Inez Raposa. A little bit about our committee. The Social Science and Architecture Committee is co-chaired by Quan Chen and Nadine Berger. It was established in 2016 by Melissa March and Evie Klein. The committee is an interdisciplinary alliance connecting social science and architecture, where we explore novel research approaches and innovative tools in the design and planning field with the potential to transform how we understand and shape the built environment. This committee, consisting of professionals from a variety of backgrounds such as architecture, engineering, library science, design research, and strategy, explores how this intersection can be strengthened to advance the practice of architecture. The committee is open to all and regularly meets on the fourth Friday of every month from 8:30 to 10 a.m. We wouldn't be the Social Science Committee without collecting data to improve our events. So if you could, please scan this. We're going to show it later, but after, we want your feedback. It's a 2 to 3 minute survey, so please fill it out. We'd love to hear from you. You will be getting continuing education credits. I won't read these learning objectives, but we're going to be focused on the topics of the film, exploring design considerations, how we can be focused, and the impact of focusing on the human experience in the built environment. Okay, so some quick housekeeping notes. We encourage you to add to the conversation and ask questions. Please raise your hand and wait to be called upon when you're ready to chime in. We'll let you know when we get there. Online audience, again, please add questions in the Q&A box to submit your question. And please be open and respectful to everyone's opinion and views, as we would like to create a safe space to all to contribute. This is the first in a 3-part series on the topics of the film What Design Can Do. So tonight we're going to be watching the film and listening to the conversation with one of its producers. Our second event is planned for June, and we want to look behind the scenes and understand the process and obstacles that for designing a positive user experience. And please stay tuned for more details on a third event in the fall. With that, I do want to mention that the recordings and event summaries will be available online at the AI website and Social Science and Architecture website. So before I introduce our guest, I just want to say a couple words about the film. We had the great opportunity to watch it with our committee members, and we immediately felt that the message of the film resonated with us, and this is something that we really wanted to share and bring to the New York design community. How often in design do we consider the healing power of space? Or do we consider the space we design as a catalyst to learn better and connect across social divides? In light of other priorities and projects, it is the human experience in our design that often comes up short. The human experience is not solved for by meticulously arranging our spatial program most efficiently and cost effectively. It requires intentionality from the beginning of the process to connect and include those in the process who will experience the spaces so we can understand their needs and how we can learn from them. We're so glad to have Sarah Goldhagen here today and learn more about what design can do. I also want to preface that our guest tonight is one of the 2 writers and producers. Sarah Robinson, the second writer and producer, is abroad and cannot participate. So very briefly, I just want to mention a couple key points about Sarah. She's taught at GSD, at the Harvard GSD, was an architecture critic for the New Republic, wrote the book Welcome to Your World, How the Built Environment Shapes Our Lives. And please welcome Sarah. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for coming out. I appreciate it. So I want to start by just telling you a little bit about what got me into this work. And I will go even a little bit backward to tell you a story about my husband, actually. Before I met him, he knew absolutely nothing about architecture. And he was a graduate student getting his PhD at Harvard and was under a huge amount of pressure and generals and all the things that graduate students have to deal with. And his first public lecture was in Fort Worth, Texas. And someone said, not me, because I didn't know him at the time, well, you have to go to the Kimball Art Museum. And he'd never heard of Kahn, he didn't know anything about architecture, whatever. So stress, stress, stress. He gives his lecture. He tells a cab driver, please take me to the Kimball Art Museum, walks into the Kimball and starts to cry. And that is what got me interested in architecture, is the power of spaces to change us and make us think and move us and change the way we move through the world. So I have always been interested in architectural experience. So I went off and got a PhD in architectural history and started teaching in schools of architecture. And it was perplexing to me that talking about experience was a little bit not done. And I kept bringing it up. I was like, well, how would you imagine the person, who are you designing for? How would you imagine going through this space? And what would they be feeling at this point? And what would they be thinking? And how would your students be learning? And so on and so forth. And the answers I often got were along the lines of, I can't really talk about people's experience. Experience is too individualistic, it's too personalistic. How could I possibly say anything meaningful? Which I got, I understood. But I didn't stop asking those questions. And then along around 2005 to 2015 came a body of information from 2 sources, basically one source from the cognitive sciences and the second from sustainability and things around the environment that contributed a lot of information that made it really possible to theorize and talk in very concrete terms about how people experience built environments. And of course, there's difference, there's cultural difference, there's gender difference. We can talk about that all day, but we're all humans. We all stand upright, we all look forward, back is behind us. That means there's all sorts of things even embedded in the way we speak to each other, like, she went behind my back, right? I mean, the way we think is embedded in the way we inhabit space, as well as the way we feel. Witness my husband bursting into tears after a very stressful day at the Kimball. And I and a group of other people, including the woman with whom I made this film, Sarah Robinson, began to look very closely at this literature, which comes from very disparate fields. It comes from cognitive neuroscience, from cognitive science, from environmental psychology, and then in the environmental sustainability from biophilia. And we began to kind of weave together a narrative about how profoundly embedded we are in our built environments in ways that we don't really recognize. I mean, even architects don't really necessarily appreciate all the different ways in which very small details, choice of materials, choice of light, we think we know some of this, but there's actually concrete data on a lot of things about the way people's experience environments. Okay, so I wrote my book, and Sarah wrote her book about the same time, and it turned out that there were sort of a handful of people who were working on this very topic and realizing the same set of things at the same time. And we began having conferences and getting together and publishing in journals and so on and so forth. And slowly it began to become a movement. And I was on a committee with Sarah Robinson at one point, and we were talking about how to get this information out to people who knew nothing about it, but who might be interested. And our initial idea was high school students, but then we thought, no, it can't, but it has to be really simple and really accessible so that people can begin to reframe the way they think about design as an instrument of public health and of fostering community well-being and so on in really concrete ways that data supports. And so we decided to make a film. And so I'll say one other thing, and then I think we'll save the rest of the comments for after, and I hope you ask lots of questions, which is that this film is 20 minutes long. We had 65 to 70 hours worth of material to make a 20-minute film. And that was just scratching the surface. There are now organizations all across the globe that are interested in these ideas. Sometimes they call it neuroaesthetics. There are all of them terrible names for this field. And I'll be the first to admit it. But nonetheless, it's happening. And so here you go. Here's the film.
Design matters. Design matters for health, it matters for well-being, it matters for perception. The evidence on the built environment's effect is significant.
When we hear the word design, we might think of a luxury chair that was never meant for sitting. But design is the decisions we make, and the decisions other people make for us. Design shapes every aspect of human experience.
It's like in the theater of life, we forget the stage. We take it for granted. And I think raising that conversation so that everybody is trying to experiment and saying, what would happen if I change the lighting? What happens if I change the window size? What happens if I change the sequence of spaces? How do I experience it? What does it do for the outcomes I'm intending to get through my design? That is not just the realm of designers. That is the realm of partnerships with human scientists and designers. We did a very small natural experiment where in the holding room of women's psychology holding unit, it was a tiny windowless room, only one table, a few chairs around it, and that's where you waited while you were going to be diagnosed. It could be hours of waiting. And all we did was change the artwork on the walls. So we took a healing savanna image, which had these colors of nature. And we had a Van Gogh replica, which had the same elements. And then we had a Jackson Pollock, which was a complete contrast. And we rotated these different types of art for 2 weeks at a time. And what we found was During the time that the biophilic artwork was on the walls, the medication that is given for visible signs of anxiety and aggression significantly reduced. And then we translated that into a dollar amount and made the argument that that one tiny replica of art saved the hospital $30,000 in a year.
And when hospital patients recover in rooms looking onto greenery, they heal so much faster that they are released home 30% earlier. Now that we spend 90% of our time in buildings, the need for designing with nature has never been greater.
How do you connect nature to the built environment? And broadly, there are three ways that people think about it, which is you actually bring nature in. The second is kind of a biomimicry, where you have pictures of nature or ornamentation that is reminiscent of natural things. And then the third is a fascinating question of, are there patterns, abstract patterns in nature that can be extracted and put into the design of buildings, like trees, for example, coastlines. And those fractal patterns can be recapitulated in an abstract way.
An exceptional example of the possibilities biophilic design offers can be seen at Maggie's Cancer Center, nestled within the campus of St. Joseph's Hospital in Leeds, England. It takes its inspiration from 3 planters and is covered in and surrounded by indigenous plants and trees.
It's literally growing. You know, you've got all this greenery around you, breathing. It's a breathing building, really.
So my reaction walking into this building was, it's like a cocoon. That experience of a Maggie Center holding you, hugging you, enveloping you, and keeping you safe.
Maggie's is organized around what experts call prospect and refuge. The entrance is hidden. Benches extend a welcoming invitation to sit. We feel protected, but it also makes us curious to find out what's beyond. That's prospecting. Smaller safe spaces are available for retreat. That's refuge.
The first time I came in was actually straight after my first chemotherapy. I was in one of the buildings behind us. It's a very brutalist building, I would say. Very concrete, very clinical, very old. My least favourite building in the whole of the hospital. And I was directed towards Maggie's Centre to help. And I sat in this spot. I actually did fall asleep, which I probably shouldn't admit, but I did. I did fall asleep because it's just so comfy.
Curving structural walls hold therapy rooms and services while evoking nature's forms. Research tells us that people find curved surfaces innately appealing. Evenly spaced projecting wood fins of varying widths break up the lengths of the walls. These fins create a rhythmic pattern that conveys a sense of coherence and order, relates the building to the scale of the body, and provides a reassuring sense of safety because they express structural support. Exposed joinery reminds us that human hands made this building. And its curved stair rail extends a gentle invitation to be touched.
And the scale of it, you know, it's grand ceilings, but at the same time small nooks within that. And you can constantly see out whilst being in a safe space.
Life and health transforming designs do not require bigger budgets. Here is a maternity waiting village in Malawi, Africa, that, with a thoughtful design, employs local material and simple construction methods to address Malawi's high rate of maternal mortality. This allows expectant mothers and their families to stay together near the hospital so they have access to the care they need when the time comes. Unlike conventional block-like hospitals lined with internal corridors, the design features well-lit, well-ventilated, smaller-scale rooms that open to outdoor social spaces. This helps to create a sense of safety because the buildings feel familiar, more closely resembling the women's village homes. Deeply human in scale, embedded with local forms, materials, and textures, these buildings are active partners in life and healing processes. Consider how most schools feel to their students.
It didn't feel comfortable. It was boring and dull.
Everything kind of looks the same.
You never really moved or got out of your seat much.
It felt like a prison.
Yes.
So of all of the typologies, if you asked me, I would say learning environments are the most untapped resources because you're there to learn. And if you are there to learn, then the built environment should be a teacher too.
Education has a huge number of stakeholders. It's not about a teacher alone. It's not about a student alone. It's not about leadership alone. But to some extent also depends on what quality of building, of structures you establish and call a school.
What if we told you that the size, shape, and design of a classroom can be just as important as the quality of the teacher when it comes to how well students learn?
So we looked at 27 schools, 153 classrooms, 3,766 pupils, and the outcome was much bigger than we expected. We could put a hypothetical average child in the worst classroom and the best classroom and say what difference would it make to move from one to the other. The answer was 1.3 learning levels, and within the UK they're expected to make 2 learning levels in a year. And remember this, it's the worst of the best, so it'd be from a cramped, stuffy, horrible classroom into the absolute best classroom you can imagine. But if you could do that, it would have a profound impact on their capacity to learn. They're just being held back, basically, by the negative characteristics in the poorer classroom.
While this study focused on primary school classrooms, here are 2 very different schools, both built at low cost, that exemplify Barrett's findings, not only in classroom design, but in the design of the entire campus. The Thaden School is in Bentonville, Arkansas. The Mabuga Primary School is in the Musanze district of Rwanda. Each draws from local building traditions. Mabuga's buildings reflect the shapes and materials of surrounding homes. Thaden's buildings look like the chicken barns so common in northwest Arkansas. Reinterpreting local architectural forms and inviting the surrounding neighborhoods in creates a comforting sense of familiarity for the students and staff, and this, in turn, nurtures their sense of belonging.
Lighting came out as being particularly important, and here we're talking about sufficient daylight, and I don't think it's just about enough light to see by. It's about circadian rhythms and knowing the time of day and having some stimulating but not too stimulating variation from the sun going round, those types of things, but not having glare.
The school was really thoughtful in the way you feel when you're in the campus with the different light and how I can use that different light for my teaching too. There's just so much variety, and we have windows at the floor back over here. And that's like so different to have the windows along the floor level, and that brings a different quality of light.
They both provide their students with views of nature, excellent ventilation, and operable windows.
But then also, can you feel some sort of connection? Is it your classroom? Do you feel as though you have ownership and that you belong there?
When I come onto Thaden's campus, you get a sense of like independence and this idea that there's so many different buildings and there's so many different paths you can take between the buildings. Like you forge your own path through your education and you forge your own path on our campus.
And then there's this issue of stimulation. Are you actually being rattled around by the feel of the classroom, or is it really boring, or is it just about right?
The corridors, as you can probably tell, there's so many different shapes and spaces, and you notice a new thing every time you're in them. And the ceilings, because it's all wood, and there's no one piece of wood that's probably the exact same thing, and that makes me think about how the building was made, why it was made.
This type of visual complexity captures the imagination by offering little micro breaks that help replenish our capacity to pay attention.
Good morning, sit down.
But not everyone learns by sitting still, or primarily through their visual sense.
Sometimes the intimacy of the other senses, the intimacy of touch and smell, and even to some extent sound, is lost when you are obsessed with the visual.
Engaging all the senses allows for more ways of interacting and with more people.
So I guess the best starting point is to think about my daughter who has autism. She's always been one that likes really strong sensory input. Like that's what makes her very excited and very active. And it just so, happened that in the work that I was doing at the university, we're working a lot with textiles and playing around with the tactility, the transparency, the opacity. The light bulb went off, and it was this idea that we could really design for all of these sensory features. The textiles themselves quite interactive. So it actually senses when you're touching and also how much pressure you're applying. We want to try and understand, what, as designers, what is the experience of this space that can be most beneficial to that audience.
Many developed countries suffer from a loneliness epidemic, which the U.S. Surgeon General says is more dangerous to our health than obesity or smoking.
A lot of the loneliness research is showing health costs associated with it. And imagine that you could have such a simple, non-pharmacological solution to this, which is a sense of community and spaces that promote a sense of community.
Via Verde, a 100% affordable housing project in New York City, creates a resilient, interconnected community by design.
The best part about Via Verde for me is really the aspect and the importance of community here. It feels like home. Yes, people love the rooftops and we love the gym and the outdoor spaces, but I think above all else, community. It feels intentional.
Simple strategies produce mutually reinforcing ripple effects. Gyms and play spaces are centrally located. Rooftop and street-level gardens offer residents casual occasions for social interaction.
People say hello and good morning and how's your kids? Those are just, to me, markers for community. And there's just, I don't know if it's designed that way, but there's just a quiet here. And the birds and the animals, it's awesome.
King's Cross in downtown London is one of Europe's largest urban regeneration projects. 67 acres of a derelict industrial site with waterways were transformed into an exemplary 21st century neighborhood that's designed for mental, physical, and social health. Vibrant public spaces of different sizes, types, and styles invite everyone in. Researchers call such places restorative environments.
What we do know, or what we're learning about access to parks and nature in cities, is that they are fostering a greater sense of place belonging, a greater sense of attachment, fosters this sense of collective consciousness that is good and hearty and means that people are friendlier, attached to each other more, communicate more. With that comes a greater sense of trust and altruism.
And with an increase in trust and altruism comes a decrease in antisocial behavior, such as aggression and crime. Buildings are built every day, all over the world, with little regard to how they influence the lives lived in and around them. And every year, we learn more and more about the myriad ways that buildings can promote life, community, and human flourishing. Now is the time for policymakers, developers, users, and designers to put this knowledge to use.
I would tell architects that if you believe that you are building for people, if that's a core belief, then you need to know something about people.
The link between mental health and physical health is well proven now. We cannot have physical health without mental health. We cannot have mental health without brain health. And the built environment has to proactively work towards all of those health outcomes.
When you have good foundation, good structures, it will speak a lot. And I'm very sure many people want to be part of such success. And this inspires young generations to venture into the future with robust hope.
These projects manifest the mission and principles of this new approach to building our communities, informed by the human sciences, embedded in nature, and responsive to people's psychological needs. They all demonstrate the power of what design can do.
So I think where I want to start us off is just talking a little bit about the making of the film. And I think your intro was wonderful. But maybe we can start off with, if you could just say a little bit about how this film about architecture is different from maybe how architecture and design is typically portrayed in media and the intent behind that.
Okay, so I had never made a film before. I mean, this was kind of like, let's make a movie. And we got an excellent director. But very quickly, we began to look, we watched a lot of other films about architecture, and there is a bit of a disconnect between trying to convey the experience of the built environment and the medium of film, because the medium of film is nothing if not character-driven. And we didn't want characters. We wanted the buildings to be the characters in the film. And the filmmakers were like, how can we do that? They're static. Anyway, but we were quite insistent that we weren't going to, like, you'll notice, we have no interviews of architects in here. None. We don't even identify the architects of these buildings. We did interview them, and they're on our website, some of them. But it wasn't the architect's intentions that we were interested in. It was people's experience of the buildings, the user's experience of the buildings that we wanted to convey. So this was the first challenge that we posed to Mary Murphy, who is a saint, as well as a very good filmmaker. She was our director. The second was the following, and this is something that I heard over and over again as we talked to PBS and we talked to various other people about doing a longer version of this, which is it's very hard to convey social scientific research in a narratively compelling way. It's very, very difficult to do that, you know, and so what you have talking heads and you have, but once the minute someone starts saying, well, this study has this kind of data, well, everybody's asleep, right? And so that was the second challenge, because every project, pretty much every statement in this film, not every, but almost every statement in this film is research-based. I can point to the studies that every one of these statements, the study about people getting out of the hospital 30% earlier when they look at window views, the study about learning, well, Peter Barrett was there for that. He's the guy that did one of the principal studies and so on. So those were two of the challenges, and we just worked this material and worked this material and worked this material and tried to, you know, interviewed people until they said exactly the right thing. And we worked very hard on the selection of, the selection of what projects we were going to use. You know, each section, the 3 sections, is basically oriented around 1 or 2 principal projects that are the anchors for it, and we really wanted to go into depth on that. So, for example, we show you what a village in Rwanda looks like, and then we show you what the school in Rwanda looks like, so you can really see the kind of regional component, the local regional component in it. These were all very intentional in a way that I look at film very differently, I have to say, now that I realize what is involved in it. I don't know how many people have made films. Anybody here? Okay, so you know, but for the rest of us, when I didn't know either, we went over this film as a team, 4 or 5 people on the team. We went over it maybe 30 times, frame by frame, in order to convey exactly what we needed to and no more. Because the other thing about film is that people, when they're watching films, they have very strong expectations to be interested, like it's an entertainment medium, right? And so you just can't be boring. So those are some of the things that I can say.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I actually did not pick up on the fact that the architects of the projects aren't named, and I think that's very
in the credits. But.
Right during the film, and I think that this film is a sort of a call to action or speak to a movement, and you were talking about how all of these statements about the projects are all evidence-based. I'm curious where you're seeing this promotion of science to inform design, where you're seeing this happen. Where do you think this is catching on currently?
Okay, so as I said, when Sarah and I independently, because we didn't know each other at the time, started working on this, it was like 2010, and we were really pulling studies from like the Journal of Cognitive Neurophysiology. I mean, crazy stuff. But we realized that all these studies, like, for example, I'll just give you one example. Has anybody heard of the London cab drivers study? Okay, so in 2005, I don't remember exactly when it was, some cognitive neuroscientists, all this information is coming out because new technology was developed to image the brain as it functioned. So all of a sudden we have all this information about how the brain functions. It's all disputed, how accurate it is, and so on, but I won't get into that. And they realized that London cab drivers take a 5-year class. They probably don't do it anymore because of GPS. They still do it. Thank you. 5-year class to memorize all the streets in London. And it's an incredible amount of detail, and they have to drive these streets and so on and so forth, and then they take this very difficult exam. So basically, all these researchers did was they imaged people's brains before they started that class, and then at the end of the class, and they realized that the hippocampus was much, much bigger in London cabbies. So what this showed was that our interactions with the built environment change our brain, change how well we can think on a very fine-grained level. Okay, I can't even remember what question I'm answering at this point.
So,
where is this going? Okay, I remember now.
Or where, like, I think, we talked about healthcare, we talked about education, we talked about housing, public spaces. So where is this research currently, where do you see it the most focused or picking up the most traction right now?
The most research we have is on biophilia, by far. Because that comes out of sustainability in the environmental movement, which is an older movement. And we just have more data. So we have a fair amount of data on the effect of, for example, bringing a stressed hospital patient into a hospital garden, heart rate settle in 5 seconds. They've done a lot of research on that. So, and health and healthcare was the first place where this started really making a lot of inroads through yet another terrible name, which is called evidence-based design. And there's a journal of evidence-based design, and maybe because it has such a horrible name, and maybe because a lot of healthcare architecture is pretty bad, nobody else really looks at any of this because hospitals tend to be pretty awful. So healthcare architects do it. But as you'll notice, a lot of hospitals are a lot better than they were 15 years ago, and have gardens and have natural light and have images of nature and that's because of the evidence-based design movement. So that's one of the places. Now, when I say this has become a movement, once young designers especially started making this connection between design as an aesthetic pursuit and basically social justice, and making a really concrete social impact on the world. Once younger designers started to realize that, this just exploded. And so I can name 10 organizations that are currently promoting these ideas, have set up advisory boards, are raising funds, are developing research agendas, are making connections. The other thing that has helped the field a lot is that cognitive neuroscientists and environmental psychologists, but especially the cognitive scientists and cognitive neuroscientists, they think architecture is really cool. They just think it's the most awesome thing to be able to talk to architects and to figure out, so there's a guy at the Salk Institute who spent years working on dementia. And then all of a sudden he realized, because some of this research is based at the Salk Institute and in San Diego at UCSD, that he could work with architects on actually getting evidence-based design moves that would help people who had to live in Alzheimer's-based and memory care facilities. So there is, at this point, it's still very disorganized. There's like no school of this, but there are departments here and departments in Lausanne and in Aalborg and Copenhagen, and the Davos people have gotten very interested in this. It's just bubbling up. Is that an answer?
I think that's a great answer. Thank you. And I guess because I think this idea is fascinating. Of course, like the cognitive neuroscientist working hand in hand with an architect. I think that there's a lot of opportunities for that. I think when you talk about dementia, I know that maybe less so in the States, but in like the UK, like universal design, creating spaces for all scales of neurodivergence. But where do you think those? I mean, I guess if you had to predict or make a prediction, where do you think those intersections are going to take place? Is it at those institutions, at universities, or are there other areas where these intersections, these different professionals might get together?
I think I'm trying to figure out how to say this delicately. Okay, let's take the American landscape, which is the landscape I know the best, right? Because I've taught in architecture schools and so on and so forth. There's a fair amount of cognitive dissonance in trying to get architecture programs, undergraduate and graduate level architecture programs, to take this stuff seriously. One, they have a little bit of post-traumatic stress from Christopher Alexander. And like nobody wants to go there, right? It's conservative, it's reactionary, it's all this stuff. This has nothing to do with a pattern language, as I think I've made pretty clear. It has nothing to do with promoting a particular style of architecture at all. It has to do with much more nuanced moves, like complexity in urban environments. I mean, I have a friend who's a cognitive neuroscientist in Canada, and all he does for the last 5 years is work on people's responses to complex versus simple urban environments, and what it does to their stress levels and their heart rates and all sorts of things. So in spite of that, I think that because so many architecture programs have been saturated with the humanities around like identity politics and post-colonialism and so on. And this seems to fly in the face of that because we are talking about human experience. And it sounds reductionist and it sounds totalizing and all that stuff. I have answers to all of that. So basically what's happened is that there are a few programs in Europe and people are creating their own institutions. So for example, well, this is an established institution, but it's not where you think it is. Johns Hopkins. There's an Institute for Neuroaesthetics based in the medical school. And they are increasingly one of the major players in promoting research around neuroaesthetics for architecture. I can go on and name the other places, but I'm not sure that this is the right venue for that.
No, I think that's great, and that sounds very promising. I'm sure they're much better funded at the medical school than the architecture school anyways. I think when you and I were having a conversation about this, one of the things that we were talking about is, so I came to this when I was in architecture school. I became interested in, which is a more in tech, like user-centered design, human-centered design, and thinking about how that could be applied to the physical design process, like the real estate and architectural design process, and ended up working at a firm where we were doing a lot of implementing those kinds of human-centered design techniques, and I think that I guess what do you think needs to shift or change, or what could be, you know, if it's this film, if it's these conversations, to start to, because I do think that there's more of an appetite in architecture firms to be doing this like very high level stakeholder engagement, you know, developing, you know, really focusing on stakeholders and users. So I guess how do we, you know, I guess get that ball rolling?
Well, I think I've thought about the design process a lot, and I think that the thing that the critical first step that has to change is how a program is written, because so much comes off of that. And if you get consultants in early who have access to this knowledge base and can say, you know, fake wood, not only does it have really terrible acoustic properties which increase people's stress levels, but it doesn't have this and that, and it doesn't have the tactile qualities that we know people actually respond very well to and make them feel well. There's actually a fair amount, interestingly enough, there's a fair amount of research that wood in interiors reduces people's stress levels. And we have the data on that. I think that is, in terms of architectural practice, I think that is the first step, is to convince people to change the program writing process. But I should say, I mean, this all sounds, it's very easy for me to tell everybody what you should go off and do, but you know, life is complicated and institutions have a fair amount of inertia. What this effectively requires is a new class of consultants, because I have finally come to the sad realization that we can't actually expect architects. We can introduce architects to the basics of built environmental perception. I think every architect should have a class in that sometime along the lines. But they are not going to be the people, unless they have a research studio in their firm, they're going to need to hire consultants. And there are people out there who are actually beginning to start consulting practices. In fact, one woman, absolutely fabulous person, who was trained as a doctor and worked as a doctor for 6 or 7 years, and then realized that the operating rooms that she was functioning in were so awful that she needed to do something else, and she went off and got a degree in architecture. So there are people out there, it's all happening, but it's going to take probably at least a generation, I think, for the expertise to build up and also the research foundation to build up. And the other thing I learned is that in order to convince real estate developers, for example, you have to have a fair amount of information on return on investment. And we have some information on how using these kinds of design practices will help return on investment, but not nearly enough. Actually, the people have published some data on this. And it clearly will help return on investment. It's pretty obvious that it will, but we just don't have the information yet.
I think that, yeah, I think that makes you make some really great points there, and it is, you know, when we're creating a building, there are so many stakeholders. You know, it's just as much of a design act as it is a political act, as it is a financial act. So I'm curious, on that end, where do you see this conversation happening with policymakers?
We have a question.
I can wait.
Oh.
No, we can go back and forth. I'll answer your question.
Oh, well, thank you so much for this wonderful film and introduction and the answers. At the beginning in your introduction, you mentioned that design could be an instrument for public health, and in the research that I've been doing, and you've mentioned a couple different times about how space can help and reduce stress or increase stress, which can create chronic health issues as well. And I'm curious, I've come to the conclusion or the idea that design could be preventative healthcare. And I'm wondering what you think of that and if you've experienced that in your own work.
Did everybody hear the question? Can design be preventative healthcare? The answer is yes. I mean, in one of my lectures, I have this this pie chart. There has come in the healthcare industry to be this phrase, the social determinants of health. So you have your genetic load, you have, you know, whatever viruses and so on you're exposed to, and then you have the social determinants of health, which include poverty, education, neighborhood, whether you're near toxic environments, and so on and so forth. And the built environment, if you look at all the different categories in most of the social determinants of health pie charts, a good 50% of them pertain to the built environment. And so if you change, that's why we put the coal drop yards in there from London. You know, if you give people access to lots of different kinds of even little public spaces, you're going to have stronger communities. I mean, that's sort of obvious. That's something that's been known for a long time. But now that we're collecting the data on the medical aspects of it, the arguments get that much stronger. So we've known more for a few generations on kind of the ways in which the built environment affects social life. What we're learning now is of the many different ways in which the built environment affects individual experience and health, in addition to the social life. Okay, no. You have to remind me.
We can, I mean, if folks in the audience have more questions, I think we can start taking audience questions.
So in school, I totally take your point about research not really being taught in architecture schools. I completely agree. I came from a background in biology, then went to architecture afterwards. So I find that in school, one of the reasons why rigorous research is not being conducted at primary source level, like in the discipline of architecture at large, it's like nobody's doing it. Is that something that belongs in the educational institution of architecture? And if yes, what does that look like?
It looks like, just like Upali Nanda, who was our main narrator,
I like that, yeah.
Just like what she said, it's collaborations between basically between environmental psychologists and cognitive neuroscientists, if they're interested, and architects and urban designers. I mean, you can only do this work in teams because the designers come with one set of skills, but then, you know, you can create research projects. Now, whether that's appropriate, I think it is appropriate at the graduate level. And at the graduate level, like the programs that I'm thinking of, the University College London, the School of Architecture at Aalborg, or School of Architecture and Cognitive Neuroscience in Aalborg, in Denmark. There are sort of research labs that are doing this work. What I'm thinking about in terms of design education is just give people the basics. Sort of basic elements. People don't know what prospect and refuge are. They don't even really understand what biophilia are. They don't understand why fractals are important. They don't, because nobody's teaching this stuff.
Or even as simple as what a confounding variable is.
Correct.
Or
yes, or research methods. Yeah, they have no idea. Yes. I
generally find that my coworkers don't even know primary, secondary, and tertiary
Correct.
Research. They're all way smarter than I am. It's an education issue.
No, it's totally an education issue. I mean, this will make me sound arrogant, but I'm going to tell you it anyway. When I was at the GSD, Rem was doing all this quote-unquote research, and I was sort of walking around, sort of like very disaffected to myself and thinking, these people think research is a Google search. Like they don't, there are scientific methods that people could be using and they have no idea. So yes, I think that, talk to any environmental psychologist, they can teach you these research methods very quickly. And it is one of the confounding issues in doing research in this field because the built environment has so many variables. And if you isolate just one variable, how relevant is that data? Let's say you just take light. How relevant is that data going to be when you put 7 different kinds of material underneath that light, and each has different reflective properties and different colors and so on and so forth? It's very complicated to advance the research, but people are doing it. So, anybody else?
Well, folks think I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, sure.
So, because, I completely agree with, that research is out there, but if you don't know the language, it can be a little, picking up a research paper and, it's been a long time since I learned about what a, R value or a null hypothesis was. Where should people start? Like, where can people start getting involved and becoming a part of this conversation?
So do you have the slides that I sent?
Yes, we do have them.
Why don't we, these are very basic. Okay, move on to the next. This is just taken from the whatdesigncando.net website, which has different, actually go back, I'm sorry. Okay, so we have tabs for, architects and designers looking for more information, real estate developers looking for more information. Now, some of these modules are pretty sparse because the movement is really still developing, but some of them were more robust. And then just go to the next. And then, okay, so here we have general resources. That's under that tab is a list of a lot, not all, but a lot of the organizations that are actively generating research and information and knowledge in the field. There's the Conscious Cities movement, which just had its 3-day-long festival. That's organized by a guy who's based in Israel, but he is the most effective connector I have ever met in my life, and he basically gets dozens of researchers from all over the world to come and give presentations for free. I don't know how he does it. Anyway, so there's Conscious Cities. There's the Academy. If you can believe it, there is actually an Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture. It's based at the Salk Institute, and they're very active in this field. They have conferences every other year and so on. So the general resources there's the Intentional Spaces Lab, which is part of the International Arts and Mind Lab at Johns Hopkins, et cetera, et cetera. That's one place to go. And then the scientific resources, you just have to dig at those. The websites for each one of those organizations themselves have a lot of information and links to a lot of different studies and so on. And the IAM lab, I think, is the one that is most effectively trying to consolidate a lot of this information into comestible form, if you want to put it that way, into a form that is easily digested by an architect who doesn't have training in this stuff. So you can say, like, I'm trying to decide what would be a better sequence for, an elementary school that I'm designing, and where it would be best to put have the natural light falling and not. Well, we're not there yet, but people are working on it, on that kind of information. Yes? This is our website, which is the whatdesigncando.net.
Hello? Oh, hi. So, in the spirit of optimism, you mentioned earlier that it may take a generation or so. Oh yeah, yeah. So you mentioned that it may take a generation or so to kind of get these designs in place. And just in the spirit of optimism, if you could change any of the policies, what would they be to kind of speed this track up?
Change policies? Well, that goes back to your question, like how do we get policymakers involved in this? And, okay, full disclosure, I'm probably not the right person to answer that question. What? Magic wand. I think you need to start with building codes. And actually, one of my personal career highs was when the director of the New York City Design and Development Corporation or Commission asked me to speak to her 1,000 employees. I was like, yes, get those building code writers in the room. I'm so excited. You know, building codes are a big problem because people work to rule and they're boring to think about, really, right? I mean, who wants to think about rewriting the building codes? But in fact, a lot of people use them. They have to use them. They have to follow them, and they're just not attuned to what the research shows is actually good for people. So that's my magic wand. Do you have other ideas? Yeah.
Especially in New York, being kind of pivotal in that, but passing that on to the other states.
I mean, the other thing, and this is a little bit controversial to stay in the United States, although maybe less in New York City than if I were sitting in Idaho, but you know, in the Netherlands, if you're a registered architect, you are obligated to serve on a design review board for the neighborhood in which you live. Everybody does it. And you have like a 4-year term or something like that. And all projects go through some kind of basic design review. Now, the magic wand fairy in me would like that to happen in the United States, and the realist in me thinks it never will. But it is a model, and and it's an entirely reasonable model. So.
Why don't we have online?
Yeah, we have an online question here from Francesca. And she's asking, I'd love to hear your perspective on how certification systems like Living Building, LEED, and so on are driving the paradigm shift toward architecture that prioritizes people's well-being.
That's not a question, but that's great. Thank
you. Your perspective, I guess, is she's asking
you mean
about.
whether these accreditation organizations are doing
impactful? Are they? And I think what she's trying to say is that there are more and more focusing on well-being credits, etc. So is that helpful? Is that impactful? Is that enough?
Yes, it's impactful, and no, it's not enough. Well does a lot of good stuff, but it's very basic. It's sort of very basic around like construction methods and, you know, how much light and so on. They have been, I've met with them. Upali has talked to them a lot. Other people who are in this film have approached them and so on and so forth. They're very reticent to go toward the issue of design. They're like, no, we can't tell people what they're supposed to be designing. We just tell them that like natural light's a good thing, and then we give them 2 points for it on the certification system. So well is good, and well is not nearly enough. And I don't, so it's the same thing with LEED. Everybody is nervous about design directives. No architect, and I assume that probably includes some people sitting in this room, wants to be told what they have to do. There, and I have to tell you how much pushback I've gotten during lectures over the years. It's like, whoa, you know, get off my back. I know what I'm doing. I'm a designer, right? And my answer to that is always, that's not the way this works. We can't develop a set of 10 principles that you are going to have to go out and follow because the built environment is simply too complex. But we do know what's better and what's worse, and we know what are really bad decisions. And really bad decisions are being made every day and going into the built environment. And those we can stop. So.
This is all very nice, so thank you. You mentioned about building codes, but I wanted to ask you a little bit more about real estate as well, and you're showing on your slides and on your website these resources. Is the real estate community actually interested? I mean, with the algorithms that are in place with financing, I recently had been reading about a multifamily development called 450 Warren, and the lack of financing, but they were able to do some private financing to create something that now everyone's very interested in. So are you seeing interest in the real estate community to develop this? Because obviously the building codes are important, but the money is really where all this is coming from, right? Yeah.
Here and there, but only here and there. As I said, like, one of the things I tried to do was get the real estate. After my book was published, I was like, they're my target, real estate developers. I got to get at them. And basically, the word that came back again and again was I didn't have the data on return on investment. And until I had that data, they weren't going to listen. And, you know, I'm not going to be the person to produce that data, but Well is doing a little bit of that. And there's some real estate developers in the Netherlands who are interested, surprise, surprise, and in Denmark, also surprise, surprise, who are interested in doing this. But they're really here and there.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm just wondering whether there's enough coherence in the community, worldwide community, and support for the community that are pursuing the ideals that you mentioned and showed so clearly in your film, to perhaps create a yearly prize for projects that exemplify the kind of work that you do, that then, you know, gets picked up by architecture magazines. The community begins to see that there is, you know, something to shoot for, and a set of ideas that are coalescing. Yeah, just is there enough support and coherence in that community to do something like that?
Not a big look. This field. My book came out in 2017. Sarah's book came out in 2019. So this field is really new. I mean, the Conscious Cities Festival started in 2015, I think. So we're talking about a decade. I think there will be. I think as more and more people, sorry, that's my son. Sorry, Gideon. He's going. Sorry, Gideon. I think there will be. ANFA, the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture, did have a competition last year, which was very well structured, that basically was it was actually design a community center for the Salk Institute using neuroarchitectural principles. And because ANFA is this like teeny tiny little organization, you know, we got, I don't know, 40 entries from schools, you know, some of them excellent, some of them really excellent. I think ANFA is the one that's most focused on trying to socialize these ideas through design studios, design workshops, and design competitions. And they will do that. How much financial support is there for that? Not yet. Not that much. But it's a great idea.
Hi. I have something to share. It's not very much of a question. I'm from Portugal, and over there we have a housing crisis, not only with the quantity, but, and most important to this conversation, construction for a long time was not good. I went to college there, and we had a research lab that united the medical school with architectural school. And we got together, we would talk with information we had from both fields to solve this problem that we had in our society. I'm not really sure what kind of funding there was. I'm not into that. But I think it was a great opportunity, a great idea, not only to make us aware of the problem, make us aware of what solutions can be there, but also motivate us to look for more information. And also, I think this ties back to this idea of research. We may not be capable or we don't learn how to do research, but I think we should at least be motivating students to this issue and where to find information. Sorry, it's not a question. I just wanted to share this.
No, that's great. That's great. I mean, I do, look, the word is spreading. And, you know, I was going to say something sort of palabum, like, I mean, there's so many problems in the world that, you know, so many horrifying problems in the world. But, you know, buildings last. I mean, you build something and it's there and it's going to be there for a long time. And as I often say, you know, it doesn't necessarily cost more to make the right set of decisions. And so that information should be fairly easy to communicate and get out. I know there are tons of obstacles, but I remain hopeful. You know, building itself is a hopeful act. So,
maybe I throw a question in here. And you just said it, buildings last for a long time. And I'm thinking this whole time, putting my sustainability hat on and circularity hat, and we need to extend the building's lifetime as long as we can. And right now, our biggest challenge is to keep all the buildings that we have in place and not build new. So all of these wonderful examples in the movie are what we should do when we design new buildings. Now, what do we do with all the buildings that we have? And is there an approach? Because I'm thinking they're not designed with any of those principles in mind. What can we do with those buildings? Now, you know, my problems are typically, again, how do we get circularity in there? How do we make it an ethical supply chain? All the things that we discussed in these rounds here in our committee. But now we have, how do we apply these principles for health and well-being on a scale of an existing building that is really not designed for the human well-being and experience?
One easy way in, I think, is through materials. I mean, a lot of this can be done through interior architecture and interior design. But not all of it. Look, the big problem, the umbrella under which a lot of this falls is natural light. Natural light is, I mean, if you had to pick one factor that's really critical, that's going to be it. And as you know, like, look at the floor plates of some of these buildings in New York, disaster, right? I mean, what do you even do there? Well, but they are doing something, actually. You know, real estate developers are realizing that if you cut through that floor plate, you can actually get natural light into there. Now, they're doing that because they couldn't turn them into residential buildings if they didn't do it, but it is an example. And if people begin to think, again, we need the data on return on investment, but we also need more data on health, because, you know, people, real estate developers, they're very focused on return on investment, but they don't want to create buildings that make people sick. I mean, if they had the choice of spending the same amount of money that would promote wellness versus not promote wellness, they're going to choose promoting wellness because it's good, you know, people want to live there. So it's partly just shoving this information out in a way that makes them realize that in some cases it's worth spending the extra money, or at least it's worth hiring the right consultants so they know what to do. That's a circular answer and doesn't exactly get to the heart of it, but it's a hard nut to crack. Yes.
Other than healthcare, what other sub-industries in architecture are leading the biophilic design arena?
Biophilia is everywhere. I mean, workplace. A lot of workplace stuff, memory care centers, but that really falls under the category of healthcare. One thing that I'm really focused on is schools, because, I mean, that Peter Barrett study just blows your mind on how much of an impact these environments have on the ability of students to learn. And there are some good people out there trying, you know, school budgets are terrible, most public school budgets. I mean, they have so little money to work with, but there are a bunch of people out there who are really, really working to try to apply some of these principles and explore that, and even use research or use their schools for research in educational environments, particularly K through 12 educational environments, less so university environments.
I have another online question. We have a question: how could we bring research opportunities to these issues like ANFA does with their research, to more of a public audience, in your opinion, an audience that doesn't speak the language of design or neuroscience?
Well, that's part of what we were trying to do with this film, is, you know, I've thought about this in so many different ways, and there was a point about a year after my book was published where I thought, everybody's a client, right? I mean, you're paying taxes for someone to build you. So what you really need to do, now this is an indirect answer to a complicated question, is you need to shift demand. So that people are demanding these kinds of spaces because they are better for them. And that requires a broad-scale public education program. And I mean, a public education program that starts in middle school, where students, because we know so much now about how profound, I mean, we are animals, and we are animals that we're building our habitats. And just like other animals, we can have bad habitats and good habitats. And the interaction really profoundly affects the flourishing of human people. So I do think that Sarah Robinson is working more on trying to get this film, or maybe a longer film, into like public broadcasting, but the problem with public broadcasting is that it may not exist next year, and and the other problem with public broadcasting is that you don't reach an audience under 50, which is who we really need to reach. But people, I don't know. I'm not sure I'm going to be the one that comes up with the right answers to these questions, but there are a lot of good people who are thinking about it.
We've discussed a lot about how the research isn't being done by architecture students or architects as individuals. And you mentioned a little bit about collaborating with the School of Medicine there. I'm also interested, I've spoken with students or teachers of public health space, and they're dealing with the health issues of architecture, oftentimes it sounds like. So is it more, obviously teaching the foundations like you mentioned, but what about creating modes of collaboration between the different schools and practices university-wide?
Well, that's being done a little bit. I mean, Harvard has a program. You know, schools of public health, again, the health is, I mean, not only is health such an obvious sector, but it's also a wealthy sector. And so schools, although public health, again, you don't know how much funding they're going to be getting now, but I think that schools of public health are interested in this kind of stuff and are trying to build these collaborations. Again, because it's such a new field, there are not that many people around. I mean, there's one woman, so she's doing interesting work, so I'll just tell you about her. She's interested in neuroinflammation. Neuroinflammation means the brain has an immune system, which wasn't even known 10 years ago. But now we know the brain actually has its own immune system, and the immune system can kind of go awry, and you can get inflammation in your brain. And that's a marker for Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And she has done this fascinating, she just works with cognitive scientists, she's an architect, and she has shown that biophilic environments reduce neuroinflammation. And she's currently at the School of Public Health at Harvard. So there are little bits of things going on here and there, and it will grow.
What's her name?
Cleo Valentine. What a name, I know. She's an awesome person, too.
Okay. I have a final question.
Okay.
If there's one thing you would want designers to take away from what you've gathered from the making of this film, what would it be?
Don't rely only on your intuition. Intuition is something that everybody celebrates, and they celebrate it when it goes well, and they ignore it when it doesn't work out for them. You know, a lot of architects will say, well, I kind of know this. I mean, I intuit this stuff. What do I need the information for? Intuition is not going to get you to the facts that you need in order to design for human flourishing, which is what I'm currently calling it. And so go out and dedicate a friend of mine just started a research studio in her firm. She's a landscape architect, and they're collecting a huge amount of studies on neurodiversity. She designs big public parks. You know, it doesn't cost that much to get someone in your firm to go off and start finding this stuff. And people are really interested. I mean, it's fascinating. It's really, really interesting. So, you know, people will get jazzed by doing it. So that would be it.
Thank you so much for being here, Sarah.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming tonight. That's a wrap. Please help us finish off the cheese plate and the popcorn, and everyone have a good night.